Planning a wedding shouldn't feel overwhelming. The Knot brings everything together in one place. Vendors who get your vibe, a custom planning checklist, guest list tools, and a free wedding website that syncs with it all. So instead of juggling a dozen apps and spreadsheets, you can actually enjoy getting married. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
Okie dokie. Hello, hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and folks, if you can believe such a thing, you're listening to the latest episode, or maybe not, of the That Chapter podcasts. It's your lucky day. Woo! Possibly the greatest podcast ever made.
It is.
I've said in one of the earliest episodes, I'm coming for Joe Rogan's crown. I like to think I have kicked him off the mountain.
No one has rebuked us yet, so I think we are the best.
Exactly. Yeah.
No one said
Undisputed.
otherwise.
Yeah. But listen, folks, it's been a week. We've read all your DMs, your naughty DMs.
Yep.
We're also recording this before the full week has passed.
Yeah.
But, maybe somebody will get it, maybe you won't. But I'm curious to learn, because I don't know the answer. Keith,
yes.
What was the question you posed in last week's episode, part 1 of the North Hollywood Shootout? This was a question to the audience, and honestly to me. Do I get a hat if I get it correct?
Absolutely, you do.
Okay.
Right, so the question was, what do these songs have in common? So there's Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana, Baba O'Reilly by The Who, Bohemian Rhapsody, Queen, Space Oddity by David Bowie, and Song 2 by Blur.
What do they all have? By the way, if people like this, maybe we should do it a regular thing.
Oh yeah, that'd be good.
I'm not giving away hats every fucking I have to pay for these fucking hats. But that'd be a fun little thing.
Yeah, it'd be good, yeah.
Keith's gimmick of the week.
My gimmick. Okay, so the answer to the quiz is...
a drum roll. Okay.
None of those songs ever say their own title in the lyrics.
That's it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, interesting. I'm not sure if I'm happy or pissed off by that being the answer.
It's one of those, I think when you get the answer, it's like, oh, of course. But I would have never gotten to it.
Interesting.
I think it's a good one.
I wonder if the listeners are going to be pissed off or no.
Well, maybe this is the last time we'll ever do it.
It's either the first or last time. I'm not sure if I'm satisfied by that being the answer.
Tell me if you like it, and if you do, I'll come up with better questions.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, you heard it here first. They are 5 or however many the fuck songs that don't say the song title in the lyrics.
Yeah.
Maybe we should become like one of those drive time shows where we do these little quizzes and like ring in.
Oh, that'd be good.
We should actually have a call-in.
I would
segment.
love a call-in show. That'd be
we
wild.
should get one. How do you do it? You can figure it out. Keith, you look into that.
I'll try to figure it out. It'd be really funny. And I think the thing is, as Mike says, a little sneak preview behind the curtain, how the sausage is made. We are heavily edited. So I don't think we could edit that. So
that'd
you'd get us raw.
Though. You know what I would love is, actually, we are totally going off tangent, by the way, is to do the listener stories. Have the listeners call in and tell their own stories, and we react to them.
I'd love that.
Rather than reading them out, which we have to do another listener story soon, by the way.
Yeah.
The last time we did it was Halloween. By the way, I'm feeling it in the Halloween spirit again. I'm getting into, I think Mike's movie reviews will make its triumphant return very soon because I am getting into my spooky mood. After Halloween comes, you're kind of burnt out on horror. You're like, oh, okay, Halloween is over.
Yeah.
Kind of like sake of spooky shit. But now, start of the
going
year,
back
I'm getting
again.
spooky.
Yeah.
And what is spooky in today's episode is the amount of bullets that were fired, motherfucker, in North Hollywood.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. This is a great story. It's so good. Do you know what I really liked, right? So
what's that, Keith?
I started looking up other bank robberies. First of all, there was a ton of bank robberies in LA. In the 7-county LA region, there was 2,641 bank robberies in 1992.
In 1 year?
Yeah.
Jesus.
That was the peak year.
That's a fair lot, isn't it?
It's crazy. But good bank robberies are a great story, but I have a few that are probably the dumbest bank robberies.
Okay,
so
hit
I'll
me.
run through these really quickly with you because they're pretty funny. So Thomas Infant, he was a 40-year-old man from Chicago. He robbed a Chicago bank using a threatening note written on the back of his own payslip, which
I like it already.
Which had printed on it his name and his home address. So the FBI said, this is a quote from the FBI, "It's fairly unusual that we see something that specifically stupid."
You're cheesy when the FBI are like, this guy is...
Dumbest bag of rocks.
Some of the stupidest shit I've ever seen. Wow.
This one was a man named Richard Hampton. He robbed a bank in Canton in Ohio and allegedly got a little confused when he wrote his demand note, which he slid over to the tellers. Well, he was meant to ask them for money, but he slipped a note to the teller at the key bank location that read, "Give me he forgot to write the money, and then underneath wrote gun." So he wrote, basically, "Give me the gun." And I was like, "But you have the gun." It's like, "Oh, I already have the gun."
Awesome. It's like Charlie Kelly or something from It's Always Sunny.
He forgot to ask for any money.
Stupid asshole.
And then the last one, then Kyle Allen Veach. So he robbed a bank at Laguna Beach, and he was pretty easily caught because his getaway vehicle was the bus.
Nice. They'll never guess me now.
That's a lot of trust in local transport.
That's really good. Hey, listen, he disappears, into the
Yeah.
crowd. I like it. All right, folks. As now we get into part 2 of the North Hollywood Shootout. In part 1, we discussed Phillips and Emil, our 2 anti-heroes, and the bank robberies they did in the years leading up to the North Hollywood bank robbery in 1997. They did many. They were always heavily armed with lots of guns. They had killed before.
They did, yeah.
But they weren't afraid to, go in there and do what needed to be done. Now, they walked into the Bank of America this morning. It was going to be a bank robbery like all the other ones they had successfully done, except, as they crossed the street, an LAPD cruiser just happened to see them as they entered the bank. And the officers noticed these 2 guys wearing body armor walking into a bank. That ain't good.
Nope.
So as Emil and Phillips were inside the bank, rounding it up, getting $300,000, which is half of what they expected. Also, there were dye bags loaded there, so the money was completely useless. As they were in there, though, getting the money and about to make a break for it, outside the bank, they were entirely surrounded by the cops. However, the cops did not exactly know how heavily armored these 2 guys were.
Yep.
So the cops are going to get a surprise because 2 tanks are about to walk out of this bank. And the 2 guys are going to get a surprise because basically the entirety of the LAPD is waiting for them.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. So contrary to what you might be expecting, it was Phillips who actually started the firefight as he exited the bank a full 4 minutes before his partner in crime, Emil. Phillips and Emil were now facing a dozen LAPD officers. There were 3 realistic options they had, right? 1, they could surrender. That's not going to happen for these 2 guys.
Never know.
2, they could try and shoot their way out. Or the third option, and most likely one, was that the police were expecting them to barricade themselves inside the bank with their hostages, because the bank had been, there have been quite a few people in the bank, and then try to negotiate a better outcome.
That's like the playbook, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly. So when Phillips dialed option number 2 with his trigger finger, the officers were pretty shocked, to say the least. Worse yet was the moment when it hit the officers exactly what they were facing. Both Phillips and Emil had level 3A plates covering their vitals, which is basically extremely hardcore body armor, like proper explosion proof. You could not get bullets through this thing. So along with armor covering his vitals, Phillips also had several more similar soft armor wrapped around his legs and forearms, plus a groin guard and a tactical vest to carry spare magazines and ammo. Both he and Emil had also sewn a watch face to the back of one of their gloves in order to monitor the time spent inside the bank.
Now, in comparison, Emil, he was considerably less armoured than Phillips, wearing only a ballistic vest backed with a additional metal plate. It may account for the extra 4 minutes that Emil, he stayed inside when the shootout first began, since Phillips, he would have known that he could take rounds that Emil couldn't. Now, the officers, they quickly worked out that they were wearing some kind of body armor, given that they had been peppered with 9mm bullets and they hadn't even taken a step back.
Yeah, the 3A rated plates, the body armor that Phillips was wearing, it would have soaked up 9mm rounds all day. Add that on to the massive frames of the shooters. Phillips was 6 foot 200 pounds, Emil was 6'3", 300 pounds. So to even have a chance at beating body armor like that and to put the suspects down once and for all, much more firepower was needed. Phillips exited the bank through the northeastern door and unleashed hell on a patrol car as soon as he saw it. The car, according to one of these civilians, just exploded. The car's doors and tires were shredded like lettuce by the steel core rounds as the officers and witnesses desperately hit the ground or ran for cover. Phillips next turned his attention to another cruiser. The sheer volume of rounds hit demolished it. The officer, though, was hit twice. More arriving officers had no time to react to Phillips showering their direction in bullets. One officer took a round to the knee. Now, fortunately, the LAPD's highly trained, better armed, and world-renowned Special Weapons and Tactics team, they were just blocks away. Until they arrived, though, the situation was pretty bad. If the patrol officers on scene couldn't keep these shooters contained, SWAT would be of no use at all.
Now, officers, they were still pouring into the area. They were rushing straight into the chaos. Within minutes, different LAPD units had the place boxed in from all sides. Even the air wasn't safe. So a helicopter was up overhead, tracking the whole thing. And now they had numbers for sure, but the firepower was absolutely unmistakably on the side of the bad guys. And Phillips, he was more than happy to prove it. He looked up, he opened fire, and sends the helicopter backing off with a big spray of bullets.
Yeah, folks, as we said at the end of the previous episode, if you're listening to this on a podcast, pull up YouTube, because this was all filmed on like live TV. So you can see exactly what we're describing here and see all the shooting taking place. It's wild.
It is,
It's definitely worth a go. It's really, definitely very interesting footage. So the numbers advantage did have an impact though. It meant Phillips' attention was drawn in far too many directions at once, which allowed an opportunity for officers to flank him, if they timed it right. The opportunity just so happened to land on the shoulders of a 6-week rookie. As Phillips was distracted, the rookie quickly managed to fire 2 shots from his shotgun. Now the shot was more than 200 yards away and pretty much a Hail Mary, but astonishingly 8 pellets hit their target. And even more amazingly, one of them slipped through a break in Phillips' body armor, hitting him square on the arse cheek. Adrenaline and narcotics, though, made a great painkiller. The pellets didn't stop Phillips. Rather, just pissed him off and drew his attention. The shot, though, unknown to the shooter or the recipient of it, had done a decent amount of damage to Phillips' range of movement and would only continue to cause more damage as Phillips' rampage continued. The response from Phillips was as violent as it was immediate. My arse! Now, as Larry Dean Hayes continued to give a running account of the situation over the radio, suddenly Phillips refocused his attention in his direction. Unfortunately, he hadn't been able to clear out the 3 civilians he'd been attempting to when Phillips had exited the bank and opened fire. That meant he was now trapped and had to try and keep 3 civilians safe also. As Dean Hayes surveyed the situation, Phillips fired. A round shattered into several chunks, which ended up in Dean's left shoulder and arm.
One of the civilians, they decided to make a run for it, but they were subsequently struck in the foot. But it could have been much worse, and there is a bit of a silver lining, is that like her running also likely drew Phillips' attention away from the shredded cruiser and the other wounded civilians behind the car's wheel well.
Yeah, so hey, she did a good job of distracting him and not getting killed. So good for her, I suppose. Now, officers took the opportunity to move north to better cover and out of the line of fire. Unfortunately, Phillips spotted them as they ran and sprayed bullets in their direction right as they tripped over. A round skimmed off hot tarmac and struck one of the officers. This carnage had taken place across less than 3 minutes. Emil hadn't even joined the fight yet. So they've got another one of these tanks who's about to exit the bank, and several officers and citizens had already been injured, but none had been killed, thankfully. For a brief moment, Phillips returned to the inside of the bank, but any hopes that the shootout was over were soon going to be dashed 2.5 minutes later when he returned, but now with backup in the form of Emil. As North Hollywood Watch Commander Lieutenant Nicholas Zingo arrived on scene, ready to take control of the situation and begin directing his officers to safety, Phillips and Emil opened fire with their modified rifles and wounded more officers. After 7 minutes passed, the shooters finally felt it was time to move and left the bank completely, firing as they did, Emil even dropping to a knee and bracing his weapon to steady his aim as he covered Phillips. Officers even played dead in the hopes that they wouldn't get riddled with the hundreds and hundreds of bullets going over their heads. Phillips moved north as Emil lay in a prone shooting position and provided covering fire. Knowing that they had burned through a huge amount of their readily available ammunition, the gunmen had no choice but to try and get to the Chevy. Not to use it to race away, but simply to lock and load, get more ammo. That's what they were going back to the car for. I feel like they knew they weren't gonna... This is going to be fucking to the death. Like, right? At this point, I think they knew they weren't walking out of here.
Yeah, I bet they wish they parked closer as well.
Oh, jeez, he's hassling this, he says as he's walking over. Now, Phillips, he made it to the Chevy, dropping the large bag of cash with the completely exploded die packs. So the very reason for the robbery was gone right there. And he switched tactical belts from the now empty one he'd been wearing to a new, fully stocked one from the car. The move to outside the bank had made Phillips and the especially less armored Emil more visible and vulnerable to the fire coming their way. Without the cover provided by the walls of the bank's ATM lobby from where they'd launched their assault, Emil was hit by one of the dozens of 9mm rounds. Now, the bullet only grazed its target's face, but it was enough to rip a deep wound between Emil's right eyebrow and the top of his eyelid. Whether it was the pain, shock, or just some reflex action, Emil immediately stalled and staggered, dropping to a knee and grabbing at the wound. The wound bled heavily, impeding his vision and aim, likely saving lives, as he couldn't shoot. While stalled from that shot, a second ran across Emil's right calf. Wounded and shaken, Emil climbed into the car to assess his injuries and get some shelter from the firefight. Despite being now largely superficial, the hits were enough to take Emil out of the fight for the next 20 minutes or so, as the officers kept him pinned down in the Chevy. He was curled up in a little ball. Stop shooting at me!
Now, Phillips, he still thought that there might have been a chance that they could shoot their way out of this, disappear completely with their bag of die money. But in reality, that chance was long gone by the time the first shot was fired. That said, I bet the pennies started to drop for him and Emil when they looked up and realised that the sky was crawling with helicopters, and not just police helicopters either. News crews were already circling overhead, smelling the blood in the water. And on the ground, a few reporters had actually arrived before the area was fully locked down, which meant, without meaning to, they'd wandered right into the middle of what was about to become the biggest shootout in LA history.
Yeah, again, folks, find it. You can find it all on YouTube. There's also a great site which has a lot of really interesting footage and stuff like that. It's just called northhollywoodshootout.net. Special thanks to that one for this whole episode. Yeah, it's it's crazy interesting.
And just to see them as well, they're they're heavily armored, but it's the amount of ammunition they have on them. The rifles have these massive, I don't know what you call them, they're gigantic magazines.
Yeah.
It's like a drum attached to the bottom of the rifle. There's so much ammunition.
No wonder they had to keep robbing banks. They were spending all their money on ammo.
There we go.
That explains it.
There we go. There's motivation.
So with his partner temporarily out of the fray, Phillips took the initiative and engaged officers and detectives who were attempting to position themselves to flank Phillips. Despite several hits, Phillips was unmoved. For now at least, the armor was doing its job. From a purely tactical point of view, Phillips' movement and actions were actually quite impressive given his lack of formal training and the high stress of the situation. Neither of these two guys had been in the military. They weren't
They were big guys.
They were big guys, but they weren't Delta Force. They were doing a pretty good job.
Yeah, he was moving like the squad leader for the Gravy Seals.
The Gravy Seal, that's exactly it. Yeah. Now, the officers on the other end of the carnage were still trying to get a grip on the situation. Just as Phillips and Emil had no idea how many cops were surrounding them, the same was true on the other end. No one knew how many shooters they were facing or what their end game was. There was also a serious risk of friendly fire. While Phillips seemed to be aware of his pal taking 5 in the Chevy, he appeared to be actively avoiding the vehicle and risking drawing fire that way. In fairness, they were kind of looking out for each other, Phillips and Emil.
Yeah.
They were like, fair play to them.
Yeah,
They were good buddies, at least.
They were good friends.
They were loyal. I'll give them that. For the responding officers, however, they had no such luxury. Basically, Phillips and Emil were surrounded, so no matter where you shoot, across from you is probably another cop. Wherever they were firing in the direction of their own guys.
Yeah.
And a lack of clear communication meant that no one knew for sure where anyone else was. That meant the responding police couldn't just unleash suppressing fire, even if they had the capability, which they also didn't. SWAT, who had the heavy guns, they had been delayed by the backed up traffic and were still crawling towards the shootout. Oh, for fuck's sake, Jesus, what's all this traffic for? We're trying to get to a shootout. Where are all these cars in the way? All the while, Phillips continued to pepper the cops surrounding him, splitting his attention between officers hiding behind the cinder block wall and a Del Taco restaurant, where he could see more officers concealing themselves. Phillips, meanwhile, paused from the onslaught and seemed confused for the first time, almost like he was thinking where to go next. So you got Emil hiding in the car, Phillips is just shooting in every single direction. It's like, where will I shoot next? He's kind of got his pick of what to do. As he repositioned himself between the vehicles he'd been using for cover, Phillips inadvertently put himself in the sights of the officers in the Del Taco restaurant, and without suppressing fire, pinning them down, they got off a shot that hit Phillips squarely in the chest plate. The impact clearly knocked him for 6, and he visibly stumbled and looked to bend over to take several breaths. He just got the wind knocked out of him. Phillips dropped to a knee and switched out the drum magazine of his rifle for a fresh, fully loaded one. He sent an angry barrage towards the officers who'd got that shot off, but luckily their cover stood up to the dozens of bullets headed their way. Phillips turned toward the bank's northeast entrance, maybe hoping to find a hole in the police cordon after he'd already sent so many rounds that way previously. Instead, he found himself facing the largest concentration of LAPD responders, who were right in the middle of trying to get closer to Phillips, when the gunman turned and he saw them and heard them shit themselves. Phillips forced the two officers back, but hit neither. Realizing now that he was essentially trapped, Phillips returned to his previous position, taking a knee behind an Acura that belonged to a customer of the bank, who was currently stuck in the vault. Probably, get away from my car!
I don't look at the window. No, not the car. I haven't paid it off yet.
Hey, look at that. That's my ride. Gets great ass mileage.
Now, getting outgunned and pretty fast, 9 LAPD officers, they tried something desperate. So they followed a colleague from Crash, the anti-gang unit, and hit a B&B gun shop about a mile south of the shootout, basically begging for anything that they could level the playing field with. Now, the owner, he was sympathetic, and over the phone, he told his staff to give the cops whatever they asked for. So they walked out with several long guns plus 2 Remington shotguns. The staff even helped load magazines for the Colts and handed over boxes of shells for the Remingtons. Now, it helped, but only up to a point. The shotguns were only going to matter at a much closer range than the officers could safely reach. Getting that close would mean crossing open ground under rifle fire, and the odds of making it into an effective range without getting hit, they were pretty slim.
At the same time, injured officers were badly in need of attention. The emergency medical response was on its way, but even if they got to the scene, they would have been unable to get to the injured, without seriously putting their own health at risk. Officers did manage to drive a cruiser through the scene to pick up some direly injured police, though, and get them to the hospital, but that was in a very desperate move. Now, the timing seems to have only worked out bullet-free for the rescue mission, thanks to Phillips taking the time to move to the trunk of the celebrity to switch up rifles. After the swap, Philip moved to the front of the vehicle and looked to get Emil's attention, who was still curled over inside, but as he reached into the car, he took another couple of shots from the officers stationed at the Del Taco restaurant to the north. The shots forced him to retreat back to his earlier position behind the Acura's engine block. In a perfect piece of timing for the officer who fired them, Phillips moved to another vehicle, a Ford Explorer, and stood to survey the situation just as 2 rounds impacted the windshield of the tan-colored Explorer. One of those rounds deflected right into the body armor covering Phillips' stomach. Even with the armor, that shot would have felt horrific to take and was enough to force Phillips out of the position. First, though, Phillips said, "Motherfucker!" and sent a couple more dozen rounds skyward towards the circling choppers above. Now, Phillips continued to fire and took a moment to retrieve another fucking hell. I mean, at this point, it's like maybe the police were hoping they would just wait till they used all their ammo.
Right,
And they kept getting more ammo. They're like, Jesus here. He retrieved another drum magazine from his ammo pouch. He was readying to swap his rifles once again. And as he did, the call everybody on scene, barring the outlaws, wanted to hear finally went out over the airwaves. SWAT officers Anderson, Gomez, Weirder, and Massa had arrived on site and were moving to engage the suspects. Finally, people with heavy enough armor and heavy enough guns could go toe-to-toe with the bank robbers.
Now, unfortunately, even though they'd brought heavy armor and guns, they lacked an armored vehicle to evacuate pinned down officers. So one of the SWAT officers, he came up with a plan. He decided to commandeer an armored bank delivery truck. Now, it wasn't anywhere near enough to stop the caliber rounds, but it was better than, the old black and white that the police had.
And right at that same point, Emil kicked the Chevy, the car they had, that was full of all their ammo, the car they had arrived there with, he kicked it into gear. He reversed out and pulled in front of Phillips. Everybody, including Emil, expected Phillips to get into the car. Even with multiple flats and soaking up dozens of 9mm rounds, the Chevy celebrity was running and could have possibly got the suspects clear at least of the immediate fire zone. Now, it wouldn't have been able to go far, but at least it could get them out of this frying pan they were currently in, and maybe they could attempt some kind of getaway. For whatever reason, though, Phillips didn't join his pal in the getaway vehicle. Instead, he moved to the trunk of the celebrity once again, sending suppressing fire towards the Del Taco before spraying rounds in almost every direction in front of him. Emil, having repositioned himself into the passenger seat, fired a burst through the Chevy's driver's side door. Right here's when the tide turned. Phillips was hit multiple times, one round shattering the thumb of his left hand. More importantly was the shots, though, that didn't hit Phillips, but the ones that hit his rifle's magazine well. That damage would have stopped the rifle working or from being reloaded. It was out of action. This forced Phillips to return to the trunk and retrieve, here we go, another rifle. He's one of the hundreds he allegedly, seems to have had there in the trunk of his car. It was slightly different to the others, but more importantly, it was in far worse condition, and basically, his new rifle was shite. It was begging to fail, which it ultimately did. As SWAT Officer Werder used the armored truck to try and gather up as many wounded and trapped as he could, including the 3 trapped civilians behind Sergeant Dean's cruiser, the rest of SWAT, Anderson, Gomez, and Massa, moved to engage the shooters. Now Phillips, he was hit again, this time by a spiraling wound that crept through his body armor on his left forearm. It was a serious wound and caused him to slow down. It also meant he could no longer command the heavy rifle with anywhere near the same authority. It was the beginning of the end game for the thieves.
Now, the two men, so they were trying to get out of the worst of the incoming fire. Phillips, he started moving alongside the Chevy. Emil, he was back behind the wheel, crawling it forward. Phillips is walking and shooting at the same time here. It's like he's escorting his own getaway. But it was never going to buy them much time. At most, a few yards, a few seconds, and then they were going to be stuck in limbo all over again. They didn't have the bank anymore. They don't have the cover of the parked cars out the front. They're out in the open. They're more exposed than they've ever been the whole time. And every cop around them, they know this. And they know that it's time to tighten the noose.
Oh man, I'm watching the footage of just that you're describing there. So the white Chevy is like driving, the boot is open, it's in the car park. And then you can see Phillips walking alongside it, and he's sort of like limping. He does not look in good shape. He's sort of like, the car stops and he's like has one hand on top of it, and then the car moves and he stumbles forward. It's wild. Yeah. Like, look at this part. He's just shooting with his handgun. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, because his other arm's gone, yeah.
Yeah, oh, folks. So Phillips continued to shower anything that moved, including the already injured and trapped civilians playing dead behind Dean's cruiser. He did that with multiple bursts of AK rounds, as Emil briefly drove the Chevy towards the north exit of the bank. As the car came to a sudden halt, Phillips moved to a new position behind a parked Oldsmobile, and Emil began slowly crawling towards the exit once again. He was clearly keen to make an attempt to flee, but it seems, as I said, he wasn't going to leave without Phillips. They weren't good guys. They were shitheads, but they're
loyal. Yeah.
They were loyal. They did watch out for each other.
Yeah. I assume you do the same for me. Yeah.
Fuck no, I'm leaving you behind immediately. In fact, I'd shoot you in the leg and then run. That's what I do.
He's the one you want.
Yeah, exactly. Take him, leave me. Phillips re-emerged from behind the Oldsmobile and continued suppressing fire as he made his way towards Emil and turned east out of the Bank of America's car park. At almost the same moment, Phillips was hit twice. One round passing straight through his right shoulder, followed a fraction of a second later by another hitting almost the exact same spot. The second round was far more impactful, shattering his right clavicle and severing his subclavian artery, a wound that, unless treated immediately, would have been fatal before too long. Despite seeming to take little notice, thanks largely to the amount of adrenaline coursing through his system and numbing his senses, the end was nearing for Phillips. What followed was the deciding factor in how the shootout ended. Phillips and Emil, they finally lost their view of one another, leaving through different car park exits, their line of sight broken by a large truck trailer. Without any means to communicate, they were divided and could no longer rely on one another for cover, making them vulnerable.
Also, to make things worse, Phillips' rifle started malfunctioning. He got what was called a stovepipe. So it's a pretty common jam, usually from like a dirty gun or one that's been run too hard. Basically, the spent casings, they don't eject properly. They get stuck, sticking up a little. So it kind of looks like a little chimney. In normal circumstances, it's a small problem. Like even a beginner can clear it in a second or two. But this was not a normal circumstance. With rounds cracking off all around him and with his blood loss piling up, Phillips, he just couldn't fix it. So he was panicking at the gun instead, and he was just making it worse, yanking at the bolt again and again, re-racking it multiple times, and he was just compounding this jam.
Yeah. At this point, he just starts walking on the sidewalk. Like the Chevy has kind of driven off. It was on the other side of that truck trailer, and it continued along the road driving forwards. Phillips is left behind. He's on the other side of the truck trailer, and he sort of just lets Emil drive off. And then he drops his rifle and just pulls out a pistol and just begins walking down the road, shooting as he walks. So Emil, meanwhile, had managed to drag the Chevy a little further along, but when an officer fired off a dozen rounds, narrowly missing their target, Emil swerved and hit a curb. Despite the Chevy failing him more and more each second, Emil managed to crawl another half block. The robbers were now separated, and 15-year LAPD veteran John Caparelli scanned for Phillips, left behind. Right then, he spotted his target, crouched under the trailer. He saw a chance and he took it. Charging over with Phillips exposed back facing him, Caporelli got within 40 feet of Phillips before he raised his department-issue Beretta and rapidly fired off 6 shots. At least a couple hit their target. Unfortunately, they didn't have enough sauce on them though to penetrate Phillips' heavy armor and simply acted as a tap on the shoulder. Phillips turned, rifle still in hand, and Caporelli, not knowing though the rifle was out of action, sensibly did a legger out of the potential line of fire. So as Caporelli though attempted to solo Phillips, the other officers in the immediate area were busy unloading their pistols and shotguns on the lame Chevy. Phillips was also about to face the 5th SWAT member to arrive on scene, Montague, complete with a heavy rifle. The bolt-action rifle could very well have ended Phillips, but it turned out it wouldn't be necessary. With the last of Phillips' very few and all bad options shot to shit, all that was left was his stainless steel Beretta. The tables had completely turned. Now he was the one pinging off futile shots with a 9mm while facing the heavy bullets of the law ripping through the air and finally smashing into his flesh. Despite the writing very much being spattered in blood on the wall, Phillips continued to send rounds in the general direction of the officers. As I said, you can see footage of this. He's just walking down the sidewalk, gun in hand, shooting shooting with one arm, one-handed or whatever, shooting at the cops. And then, he has a pretty general realization. This is only going to end in a drawn-out death or a long, slow one in prison. All out of options, Philip fired one last shot, and there was no chance of missing its intended target, and it shut off Philip's lights once and for all. He saved the last bullet for himself. The situation was still so chaotic that the officers facing him didn't immediately realize that 26-year-old Phillips had tapped out, continuing to fire dozens of shots into his body. Several of which would have been fatal had Phillips not already taken the old copper sleeping pill to the brain. Emil, though, now was on his own, and he managed to get the Chevy to an intersection, causing traffic to come to a stop around him as he barreled through. Though he didn't know it just yet, he'd be rejoining his buddy pretty quickly. What Emil did know, though, was that he desperately needed to ditch the Chevy cheese grater in favor of something with fewer speed holes. Emil spotted a perfect candidate, a red Ford Tempo. In an effort to carjack the Tempo, Emil swung the battered Chevy across lanes, blocking the road for the Tempo before climbing out of the passenger side door and walking towards the stalled Ford. The driver of the Tempo, seeing a, 300-pound masked man with a fucking automatic rifle walking up to him, did the most sensible move ever, threw the truck into reverse and emptied the gas tank.
I think it's hilarious. For some reason, Emil, he started to try to wave the driver to come back, to beckoning him back. He's no. So Emil, he sent a single round after the car. It did miss, but it didn't go unnoticed. So an officer, he heard it and immediately calls it in over the radio that Emil is now out of the Chevy and he's actively targeting civilians. So that changes the whole posture of the response. So with the Tempo gone, Emil, he turns east, heading back towards where Phillips had last been. Now, maybe he saw Phillips' body at that point, maybe he didn't, it's hard to say. Either way, he makes it back to the Chevy and climbs in. And there's this weird little moment where he seems to try and steady himself, almost like he's psyching himself back up. So he gives himself a little fist bump on the chest right before he gets the car to start moving again. Somehow he manages to crawl the Chevy eastward. It's barely alive at this point, coughing along, fuel spilling out behind it as it limps away. Honestly, Chevy, they should use the footage as an advert for the endurance of the car.
Yes, I'm looking at the footage right now. It is, so it's a white Chevy Celebrity. The trunk is open. The driver's side door is open. The windscreen is covered in bullet holes. It is completely smashed through. It is barely moving along, and he's just jumping out of it. He's firing off shots. The footage is wild, by the way. I don't keep mentioning it, but it is insane.
That's so good, yeah.
So despite the failed first attempt, Emil still thought it was a solid plan to get a new car and began looking for a new target. The unfortunate person to cross his path was aerospace engineer Bill Maher on his way home from Van Nuys Airport. Emil actually let other vehicles pass in front of him, even slowing for one, perhaps intending to grab the driver, but thinking better of it. Emil would pass several vehicles before he finally threw a hard left turn right into a green sedan. Preparing to exit the Chevy and bear down on the stunned driver of the sedan, it seemed, the sedan wasn't the perfect option, but the only one. But then Emil suddenly spotted Bill Maher's Jeep Gladiator coming up behind the sedan. He moved the Chevy back into gear and drove to block Bill Maher's Jeep. As Phillips lay dead behind him, the commandeered armored truck, the F-700, was collecting the injured officers. The 3 other SWAT officers who'd arrived with Werder, Anderson, Gomez, and Massa were racing towards Emil's location. As Bill Maher abandoned his Jeep and ran for his life, Emil retrieved a final illegally modified unused rifle, a Bushmaster, from the Chevy's trunk and tossed it into the back of the Jeep. Emil entered the driver's side door and was faced with a darkly hilarious realization. Bill Maher's Jeep Gladiator, his new getaway car, wasn't going to quite work because Bill Maher had taken the keys with him.
That's all on video as well.
Yeah. You can watch this. It's hilarious.
It's pretty comical.
It's so funny because you see him like he gets in.
Yeah.
He's there. He pulls over beside it. He gets out. And then I think you see him get in. And then he immediately is like, fuck. You can't see what happens, but he just gets out like a moment later. He's like, what the fuck? And he's like, uh-oh. He just kicks the door open and is like, okay. He runs then to the front of the Chevy. Meanwhile, a police car has pulled up on the other side of his car and you can see gunshots. You can see a gunfight going off between them.
Yeah.
So you got Emil crouched in the front of his Chevy, shooting towards the back of the Chevy at an LAPD cruiser. It's wild. 5 officers would end up around 30 feet from the suspect. As Emil made for the Chevy, the final exchange was on. Emil, armed with the Bushmaster, unleashed a huge shower of bullets in the general direction of officers. As SWAT officers Massa and Gomez were exiting the cruiser, SWAT officer Anderson put 2 perfectly placed shots right into Emil's chest. The rounds zipped through the soft armor, but were caught by the steel plate behind it. Still, it was enough to drop Emil for a few moments. When Emil popped back up though, Anderson did the opposite. Realizing that they weren't going to get through the significant armor anytime soon, Anderson, he dropped down to his stomach, and lying prone, he could clearly see the exposed lower legs, ankles, and sneakers of Emil. Haha, he forgot the old foot body armor. Dummy. Anderson took aim and squeezed off 2 devastating shots. The rounds crippled Emil, essentially shattering his leg and blowing chunks of bone out along with the copper and lead fragments. And more officers joined the fight. It would have been clear to Emil that his only way out of this, not in a body bag, was to surrender quickly. Yet, he fought on to the bitter end. Emil took several more quick rounds in succession, many to his thigh. Still, he fired round after round, a tenth of a second apart from one another. Dropping back into cover, he took another round. This one had enough impact that it caused him to squeeze down on the trigger and fire off an uncontrolled volley from the rapidly emptying rifle.
Now, unlike Phillips, Emil, he hadn't bothered with a backup weapon at all. So he'd no pistol, no nothing. So once he was out, he was out. So he fires off one last desperate burst, but by now SWAT, they haven't pretty much dialed in. They're just waiting for him to give him an opening, and he does. So a few rounds hit him in the forearm, and then that's it. He can't return fire even if he wants to. He can't even properly work his weapon. And worst of all for him, he can't even use it to punch his own ticket.
After 44 minutes of hell, the fight was done. Emil would find himself on the ground, his closest friend dead, looking up at the sky. Rounds continued to hit him like they had Phillips minutes earlier. By the time Emil was finally ready to call it quits and surrender, it was too late to communicate to the officers facing him. SWAT officer Gomez would be the first, accompanied by Massa, to move in cautiously on the devastated but still living Emil. Massa kicked the Bushmaster away as Gomez kept his finger ready to end Emil if he so much as flinched. As Gomez kicked Emil and ordered him to roll over onto his stomach, Massa moved in and pressed the burning muzzle of his own AR-15 to the back of Emil's head, right at the base of his skull. If Emil had any fight left in him, Massa wasn't missing that shot. The subsequent autopsy would record the perfectly circular burn scar the red-hot barrel left on the suspect's skin, branded forever as property of the LAPD at 10:01 a.m. It had been a busy-ass morning.
Say the least, yeah.
Now, the treatment of Emil from this point is, it's up to serious debate. Though he had incurred several serious injuries, had he received urgent medical attention and likely many long, painful surgeries and an equally drawn-out rehab and recovery, Emil, he could have survived. He could have actually, which would be a hell of a story to tell.
Right? Yeah.
If he had. That option, though, was never given. Emil, he was put into the custody of an officer, and for the next few minutes, he simply lay bleeding, with an ambulance at one point passing just a few hundred feet from him. After lying there for a little over an hour, Emil would pass away on the street. Now, in fairness, I wouldn't prioritize an ambulance for the guy who caused this at all.
Yeah.
But leaving him there for an hour,
It's a bit much.
that's a bit. You probably could have,
Done something, yeah.
Yeah, an hour is a long time.
It's
I'm
a
sure
very long
there. And I mean, the craziest thing in this, the only people to actually die were Emil and Phillips.
That's the thing.
They injured a lot of officers.
They did, yeah. I'm sure there was a lot of life-altering
civilians,
injuries. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Didn't kill anybody.
No.
Which
yeah.
is crazy. But yeah.
It's mad, yeah. There's some versions of the story that have the suspect Emil begging the cops to finish it right then and there, and the officers, they basically telling them, nope, see you in court. The families of Emil and Phillips as well, they later filed a wrongfully death lawsuit against the LAPD, but it didn't go anywhere, and honestly, it was always going to be like a bit of a hard sell. The LAPD's defense, it was pretty solid. They said that they didn't know if there was still another shooter out there, and they had to prioritize securing the scene and getting help to the victims that Phillips and Emil had left behind. And the other uncomfortable truth is, those two, they had plenty of chances to surrender, multiple chances.
True.
So they could have done it at any point. They could have done it before a single shot was even fired.
Yeah,
but they decided not to.
Yeah, they chose this for sure. The way they carried it out, they could have only wanted to go down in a hail of bullets. The fact that no one but the outlaws was killed was only basically by, like, chance, completely. But yeah, Keith, as you said, ultimately it was their own bad choices that left their partners widowed and children fatherless. By the time the final shot was fired, approximately 2,000 rounds, the majority of which was fired by the gruesome twosome, had been exchanged. The area around the Bank of America, which is just 1.5 acres, it resembled an active war zone more than it did the busy retail park it had started the day as. I mean, we're talking like an hour earlier. Chunks of broken concrete, pools of blood, and twinkling shards of shattered glass littered the ground. A combination of gunsmoke and powdered stucco lingered in the air for hours after the fight was done. It would be several more hours before the scene would be considered safe. The school opposite the shootout, there was a school opposite the shootout, folks, fortunately, as you said, had no casualties, but was held in lockdown, with the final children being sent home at 8 o'clock that evening.
Ooh, that's a long day.
Yeah, they walked into the bank at 9:01, the shootout ended at 10, and the kids were still in there 10 hours later. The physical and mental trauma to the humans involved, both civilian and police, was very real, and continues, to this day. Some wounds never heal completely, and those that do, they leave deep scars. That's on the side of the gunmen's families too. They played no role, but their lives changed forever. Then there's the impact of this shootout on the continued militarization of the police, not just in America, but around the world. Police these days, in so many countries, act more like military. You see police getting tanks,
right,
and these like crazy rifles and stuff like that. And it is, because of incidents like this.
Yeah.
When they walked out of the bank, the police had nothing to go up against them. They just had like their little 9mm.
Their bullets were literally bouncing off the bad guys.
Exactly. So you can kind of see why they would want better armor-piercing guns next time, please. And that has, of course, had a huge step up, though, because now the bank robbers have to get doubly armor-piercing, or armor, body armor that can't be pierced, and bigger guns, and it kind of causes an arms race between the cops and criminals that does continue to this very day.
Well put.
Thank you, Keith. Shine. And that is the story, folks, of the North Hollywood shootout of Emil and Phillips, and the wackadoo story that it is. I know I kept bringing it up, folks, but I really would highly recommend if you check out the footage on YouTube. It's
a good watch. There's a good movie as well. It's called 44 Minutes.
44 Minutes, I haven't seen it.
It's like a dramatization of what happened,
Okay.
but it is it's pretty accurate.
Okay, 44 minutes. Let's give it a go. Who's in it? If I don't recognize any of the actors, I'm not watching it.
I don't know. I think it could be on YouTube. I think you might be able to watch it
44
on
minutes. Oh, Michael Madsen. He's in it. We got Michael Madsen, Ron Livingston, who I know from Band of Brothers, and then that's it. Wait, who plays? Okay, so Oleg Tartarov plays Emil. I don't know who he is. And Andrew Berniarski plays Larry Eugene Phillips. I don't know who either of those actors are, but I wish them well. All right, folks. Yeah, so give it a go, or check it out, or not. In fact, you know the story, so why bother?
Yeah, just listen to this again. Actually,
exactly.
Yeah.
Just listen to this, and Keith, do some. Maybe we should do some machine gun sounds like. So to immerse.
Pew 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 pew. Oh, that was good.
Thank you. I'm working on my machine gun sounds. All right, folks, and you can join me and Keith in the next episode of the TCP, the That Chapter podcast.
What will it be? Who knows?
Oh, folks, I actually have no idea what the next episode is going to be.
I'm not sure either yet. But I can tell you what, it's going to be a good one.
It will be the best one ever. All right, folks, please take care of each other and yourselves, because I love you.
I'll see you.
All right, Mike out. It meant Phillips' attention was drawn in far too many directions at once. At once. What the fuck? I'm talking like Tony Soprano. Hey, Chris, you at once.